Hello, Sumit. Mustafa is here. Can't hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
How are you?
Fine, fine. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yes. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine.
Yes.
And everything okay with you?
Yes.
Okay, good. How is the COVID situation in Sri Lanka? Under control?
Under control. Yes, we are also doing this vaccination program. Yeah. That's the Indian one, and then Chinese one is expected in next couple of days.
Okay. Very good. So because of the COVID, we can't see you. Now we can see you virtually at least.
At least we have the technology to see each other.
Yes.
Hi, Posh.
Posh, how are
Hi,
you?
Sumit.
Good. Now, Posh has changed. The COVID has
How are
given
you,
us
sir?
this year.
How are you?
Yes, his facial geography has changed. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He is scary, you know.
Why is scary, Mustafa?
Your mustache is quite intimidating, you know.
Really? Really?
Sir, just to warn you that we are going live on Facebook now in a second. Just to give you a bit of warning. Sir, actually, he got confused with the Zoom link, but I have again sent in the Zoom link to him. So I think he'll be joining in a minute or so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mustafa, then I'm going to be client saver. I'll just remove all this thing if it is intimidating.
Sir is here.
Okay, good. Here am I.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
We'll be starting in a minute, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, very good.
আচ্ছা সেলিম ওনাকে আনমিউট করো না কেমন তাহলে
No, definitely will not.
উনি নিজে নিজে
Sure.
করতে পারবেন না হ্যাঁ
স্যারকে সব সময় আনমিউট থাকুক স্যার
আনমিউট করে
Definitely.
রাখো ওই মিউট করো না
জি
So who are here? I see
sir.
Raj. And
Sir,
then
you are seeing Sumit also, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Sumit Nakandada.
good morning. Acha. Raj now has a mustache.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Intimidating, sir.
I see. Very good. No, it makes you look much, as I said, much smarter.
Thank you, sir.
Do we have a friend from Thailand here? Salim?
Salim, Thailand থেকে কেউ
Sir, we are expecting, and he'll be joining. He's in a meeting, but he'll be joining, sir.
Okay. And who is here from India?
Sir, Dr. Nityananda, he's here from India.
Acha. And what about Probir?
Probably he'll be joining, sir.
Acha.
Sir, now I think we can. Now we can formally start the session. On behalf of SANEM, I welcome you to the Bay of Bengal Economic Dialogue 2021 on post-COVID challenges in the Bay of Bengal region, which is being held from 8 to 11 February 2021. We're extremely delighted to have Professor Rehman Sobhan as the keynote speaker. Professor Rehman Sobhan is an economist whose ideas were central to the tenets of Bangladesh's struggle for freedom, a visionary whose initiatives have defined institutions, facilitating knowledge, and an extraordinary intellectual who has inspired generations of thinkers and doers. Sanam is honored to present Professor Rehman Sobhan as the keynote speaker at this conference. We are delighted to have Ambassador Sumit Nakandala, Distinguished Fellow, Pathfinder Foundation, and former Secretary General BIMSTEC to chair this session. We are happy to have 3 dignitaries to make brief comments on the keynote speech. So they are Dr. Sutipant Chirat Tivat, Professor Emeritus, Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. We are expecting him to join sometime in this session. Dr. Poshraj Pandey, Chairman, South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment, South Nepal. And Dr. Nityananda, Director, Council for Social Development, CSD, India. There is also a Q&A session, question and answer session. So I would now request Ambassador Sumit Nakandala to moderate this session. Over to you, Ambassador Nakandala.
Thank you, Salim. Good morning to everybody. It is my privilege to chair this very important meeting where Professor Rehman Sobhan is expected to deliver the keynote address. As Salim very correctly said, Professor Rehman Sobhan is so central to the South Asian regional cooperation and integration. I have been associated with his writings, his speeches, and personally I was associated with him when I was the Secretary General of BIMSTEC. And he is the most important person to deliver a keynote address in this session, in this exercise, basically, because he, as all of us believe, the way forward is the economic cooperation and regional economic integration. And we also have very eminent panelists to make brief comments and remarks on the keynote. That is, as Salim said, Dr. Poshraj Pandey, again a committed academic and researcher on the South Asian regional integration. Then Dr. Sutipan from Thailand, he's also a very committed academic on the regional integration and regional cooperation in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And then we have Nityananda, whom I knew for some time, who's also done commendable work on deepening regional integration and cooperation. Professor Rehman Sobhan, yesterday we had the inaugural session where we heard the Bangladesh foreign minister saying that he is deeply committed for promoting regional cooperation and integration in the Bay of Bengal. And he also said that regional cooperation and integration is inalienable part of the Bangladesh foreign policy. So we are very happy to note that. Hello, sir, I'm having the webinar. I'm sorry, this disturbance. So it is very important that we realize that the commitment from member states. Now, very soon, chairmanship of the BIMSTEC will be handed over from Sri Lanka to Thailand, and in fact, Thailand is also a very committed member of BIMSTEC, and it's also a founding member of BIMSTEC like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and India. So with this background, dear friends, colleagues, I think this is a very important session where we are going to hear the visionary ideas and very pragmatic ideas of from Professor Rehman Sobhan, how we should go about how to deal with the different facets of regional cooperation and integration, and how to address the obstacles and difficulties and challenges I think his entire life, academic life, was devoted to addressing and analyzing these issues, especially with respect to SARC. Now we have BIMSTEC. With these words, it's my great privilege, sir, Professor Rehman Subhan, to invite to deliver his keynote address. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm very appreciative of being invited to address this very distinguished meeting on a very important subject. Ambassador may perhaps recollect that when he was Director General of BIMSTEC based in Dhaka, I may even have spoken on this subject at an event organized by him over there. Of course, now much water has flown under the bridge since then, and there is some modification of the conception of BIMSTEC, which has now evolved into a Bay of Bengal initiative. My presentation, of course, is addressing a wider, locating the issue of the Bay of Bengal initiative into a wider context. Therefore, I'm addressing my words under the title of Promoting Economic Cooperation Across the Bay of Bengal and Beyond. And I think this is a very central element of my presentation. Now, as the ambassador and Salim Rehan pointed out, I have been involved in various processes of regional integration for almost half a century, actually. I'm now 86 years old. And my first initiatives actually were at the bilateral level, where as a member of the first Bangladesh Planning Commission, we were involved in promoting Indo-Bangladesh economic cooperation. But from 1979 onwards, I have been engaged in the very long and frustrating journey of promoting South Asian cooperation. I've been involved in a succession of entities, the CSCD, the Committee for Studies on South Asian Cooperation, CASAC, the Committee for Association for South Asian Cooperation, and finally SACEX, which was in fact institutionalized South Asia Center for Economic Policies, which was hosted by CPD. And we were more or less one of the founding agents of that. And in between, I have also been a member of the group of eminent persons, which was set up by SARC heads of state to address the future of SARC. Unfortunately, the recommendations of the group of eminent persons was in fact targeted to reach full integration by the year 2020, which is now. And of course, we know how far we have progressed in that direction. Beyond my engagement in South Asian cooperation, I have, of course, been also engaged in a number of sub-regional initiatives. We were involved, I was one of the founding members of the BCIM, what was known as the Kunming Initiative, linking up Northeast India, Yunnan province, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. And of course, I was again involved in some of the early meetings of the BBIN, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. And also, I was, of course, engaged later on in BIMSTEC events. In fact, prior to BIMSTEC, there was also some entity known as the Indian Ocean Rim Initiative, which of course also involved the ocean rim countries, including Iran. In fact, I remember attending a meeting involving some Iranians as well in that particular discussion. So this process has been going on for quite a long time. My most recent engagement, of course, was to be invited last year by the Chinese at the second BRI summit, in which they had a collection or gathering of global think tanks to in fact address problems of cooperation across the BRI region. So I have a long exposure to attempts at regional cooperation, and I'm drawing on this experience to get some understanding of what are the relevant elements in promoting a productive process of cooperation. And here I will begin my presentation by putting forward a particular hypothesis. Now, since I'm not an expert in trade and I'm not really doing primary research in these areas, I would invite those of you who do engage in this, Salim, Oshraj, my colleagues at CPD, my colleagues at RIS in India, including our friends at Thailand are there. Hypothesis is that trade alliances have to be built upon the structure and density of economic relationships between alliance partner members. That is the central element of the successful alliance. Now, new or more contemporary alliances involving countries already plugged into dense trade networks have much more limited prospects for prospering. The concluding observation of this would be that the BBI initiative has a future only if China can be involved in this process, based on the premise that every single member of the BBI initiative, principal trading partner in terms of aggregations of import and export, and also now increasingly accessing capital inflows, is today China. This is the contemporary reality within which we operate. So any suggestion that we can transcend this objective reality within which every BBI country functions is really not going to be helpful and will be disconnected from the reality in which we live. Now, I would draw your attention to the fact that within the Asian region itself, there are any number of trading arrangements and economic cooperation arrangements. Apart from within the South Asian region, you have, of course, SAARC, BBIN, you now have the Bay of Bengal initiative. Beyond that, of course, you have got ASEAN, you have got ASEAN +3, you have now got the Asia-Pacific APTA arrangements, and of course, most recently signed just in November of this year, of 2020, you in fact have the Comprehensive Asian Economic Partnership Agreement. The Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement for East Asia with 15 countries, which has China, Japan, Republic of Korea, Australia, Japan, and of course all the ASEAN countries involved in this. Now, these are all relevant, and over and above this, we have a variety of bilateral FTAs operating over here. Sri Lanka itself has 2 FTAs, one with Pakistan and the other with India. In India, in fact, it is actually involved in a comprehensive economic partnership arrangement. Correspondingly, Nepal, of course, has been in a FTA arrangement, as also Bhutan, and now more significantly, they have been in a virtual comprehensive partnership agreement with India without actually calling it so for many years. So Bangladesh has, of course, also recently been given duty-free access to the Indian market, though it is not part of a FTA agreement. So these are all relevant variables which are in fact actually driving our economic relationships at the multilateral level. Now, as far as the earliest initiatives were concerned, and SAARC was in fact, also South Asian countries were really at the center of the early initiatives. Work was already being done using gravity models to assess the positive benefits arising out of regional cooperation in South Asia. The earliest work, if I recollect, was done by the very distinguished Yale economist T.N. Srinivasan, who in fact made estimations. So I see now that in subsequent session, some presentations are being made drawing on gravity modeling for the BBIN countries. Now, the practical difficulty is that that trade modeling using BBIN is applying, of course, the same model to a variety of different countries, which are constantly overlapping. So you will get positive results from gravity model for most of the countries who are in South Asia, and those, of course, who are now currently engaged in the BBI initiative. Of course, we had pointed out from a very early day that there were definite conceptual and methodological problems in gravity modeling because it was essentially a static concept drawing on existing trade and production structures, whereas the essence of cooperation is the opportunity to, in fact, diversify production structures and to therefore then correspondingly diversify trading opportunities. So obviously, if you looked at the Srinivasan model, which was a product probably of the mid-80s, and you look at now the trading structures in the 21st century for these countries, they would be drastically altered with a whole range of new industries now coming into play with the whole range of new trading networks operating over here. Now, the difficulty has, of course, been further complicated by the fact that all these relationships also extend into our wider international relationships. I mean, for this reason, you had the founding of the WTO, which was designed to really harmonize the rules of the game for international trading. But unfortunately, it did no such thing because it was constructed around, in many cases, a whole range of bilateral negotiations for seeking entry into membership of the WTO, in which different countries then participated under different sets of rules. And of course, now that WTO has gone into the back seat because of the changing perspectives in the United States, now it is no longer, in fact, a player of that sort. The consequential outcome of these sort of multi-layered trading arrangements was what I think Jagdish Bhagwati then termed the spaghetti bowl system of international trade, in which a whole bunch of different trading arrangements were cross-cutting with each other. And of course, you then would have the paradoxical situation that any one country in BBIN may be having relationships with another member country under 4 or 5 different trading arrangements. In fact, as far as India was concerned, and India was looking at its trade with its partner countries or even with Thailand, it would be able to access that relationship under multiple different trading arrangements, so that an average businessman would be in a state of considerable confusion as to the terms and conditions under which he would be trading with a particular country. So that this again is the constraint within which we all have to operate. Now, the BBI initiative is, of course, constructed largely around the South Asian countries. However, the BBI initiative, in the name of BIMSTEC, actually originated in Thailand. And the Thai initiative itself originated out of the 1997 crisis, financial crisis in Southeast Asia. I was working on research project for ESCAP in the late 80s on addressing the wider issues of Asia cooperation, in which I traveled to a number of Southeast Asian countries, where I found that they had very low interest in promoting economic relations with Asian countries. I remember a meeting with the industries minister of Malaysia, a lady by the name of Rafida Aziz, who was quite contemptuous of South Asian countries, saying that all they do is talk, 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 and they have no capacity for action. So what is our interest? Because they were then the new emerging tiger countries, the next stage in the flying geese model. But of course, the Asian crisis brought them down to earth. And Thailand at that point began looking westwards to see the new growth opportunities. It emerged in a region with a population of over 1 billion people at that time, now certainly 1 billion plus people in that region, and reached out to us through BIMSTEC. But of course, you have to keep in mind that it wasn't only at that time Thailand which was reaching out to South Asia. It was also China. And the inception of the BCIM was in fact around 1998, 1999, in which we were invited to the foundation meeting in Kunming to in fact address this. And again, when I had initiated work which ended in my book, Rediscovering the Southern Silk Route, and I had traveled to Kunming at that time, this would be around 1998, I found that the Chinese were already looking to the Bay of Bengal as the new opportunity for transforming the fortunes of Yunnan, which was the landlocked province of China and one of its most backward regions. And the expectation was that it was really through the Bay of Bengal and through accessing into South Asia that the fortunes of Yunnan province would be changed compared to the coastal regions on the Pacific coast of China. And so that was the dynamic of the initiative. Of course, Yunnan was also involved in a number of other trading arrangements initiated by the Asian Development Bank, which was connecting them also with the ASEAN countries. So these processes acquired their own dynamic. Now, let me bring you to the crux then of my lecture. What we have to essentially keep in mind is the new realities which have really emerged in the Asian region. And the driving dynamic of that reality is really the rise of Asia. Asia has been for the last decade or more the fastest growing region in the world. And it is projected to be now the dominant region in the world, if not in the course of the next 2 decades by the middle of the 21st century. And this dynamic originates not from accidental commodity booms, but originates from the competitiveness of the Asian economies, which means that they have become globally more competitive than other regions, and that these factors, in fact, are then self-sustaining processes. It isn't that they will go away, they will become increasingly more competitive. And secondly, they have become, and here in my conception of Asia, I include also West and Central Asia, they've become the main sources of capital surpluses in the global economy. The foreign exchange reserves of the Asian economies, including Japan and West Asia, now account for about close to 70% of global reserves. They account for close to about 70% of global sovereign wealth funds. And they account for about 60% or 65% of US Treasury bill holdings today for underwriting the US trade and budget deficit. So these are now very powerful players in the global economy. And of course, at the center of this, it is China. Now, the consequential implication of this is that when you now look at the latest alliance, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership for East Asia, with the 15 countries included, including Japan and Australia, this is far and away the most powerful economic alliance in the world today, even more powerful than the European Union. Now, what is much more significant about this particular partnership is it is built around the density of economic linkages which have really been built up over the last 2 decades. Now, what do we mean by the density of economic linkages? I asked some of my colleagues at CPD to prepare me a set of tables on the trading relationships, imports and exports of South Asian and East and Southeast Asian countries. And what do I find over here? I find quite remarkably that if you look at the total trade volumes, then for virtually every single country, except perhaps for the Philippines, the largest trading partner is in fact actually China. In case of imports, it is certainly the largest partner of virtually every single country. I think the India, China figure, US figures are more or less equal. I don't know, India has not given its numbers for the for 2020. I would imagine the Chinese share would have gone up in that. And as far as exports are concerned, of course, a number of South Asian countries have as their principal trading partner the United States and the European Union. But of course, if you add in the imports, then this changes. Now, what the significance of adding in these imports tells us is that certainly for the smaller South Asian countries, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, our principal export really is finished goods in the way of ready-made garments and leather products. This means that it is dependent on networks of intermediate and capital goods imports from other countries in order to deliver the finished goods over there. Now, if you look at the import patterns of all the South Asian countries, you will see that the principal trading partner happens to be China. And of course, a number of other East and Southeast Asian countries who are delivering both capital goods and intermediate goods. So that the export of finished goods to the United States and European Union is carrying a whole bunch of embedded products produced in China, particularly in Southeast Asia, particularly, And this is the new reality. It isn't therefore that our trading partnerships are suo moto, built on our own production capabilities, but are heavily contingent on the way in which we have actually built our trading links over here. This is, I think, a very important factor. I was looking at, again, the 2020 figures were available. India was, I could not access Indian figures, where the Chinese share of trade again in the COVID year has, of course, increased even more and is certainly the number one source of imports into every single country in the region over here. Now, what conclusions? No, I'm not. The further problem you have to keep in mind now is the new trends in capital flows. Now, now if you have seen the numbers that are the importance now of sources of capital in the global system, which are now Asia-centric, with China far and away at the center of that. After all, China's foreign exchange reserves are in the range of $3 trillion, its sovereign wealth fund in the range of $1.5 trillion, its holding of US Treasury bills in the range of $1 trillion plus. And of course, originally, a lot of it was simply being cracked into international markets, which were seen to be the better sources of investment. But over the last decade now, China has been increasingly channeling its investments into the developing world, into Asia. And of course, this has come through a variety of ways. It has, of course, been the main prime mover in establishing the BRICS Bank, of course, with a number of other countries, but more important, in the Asian Infrastructure Bank, which has moved forward very rapidly and is in fact going to soon catch up with the Asian Development Bank. I was looking at the latest numbers in which the Asian Infrastructure Bank has already, let me see now, it has already extended $4.5 billion worth of loans to India alone. And another $1 billion is in the pipeline. So that 1/3 of the infrastructure bank's loans have actually gone to India, where India is in a state of, you may say, strategic contestation with China. But the economic reality is very different. Now, apart from the multilateral initiatives and China's bilateral FDI coming into the region, because obviously this has built up very dense trading networks across the region. If you look at the ASEAN countries, both in terms of imports and exports, their principal markets are now in China. Now, this is not the case for South Asia, but for the ASEAN and East Asian countries, including Australia, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Taiwan, which is in fact having major tensions with China over the Gulf of Taiwan. Their overwhelming trading partner in both imports and exports happens to be China. Now, this of course has meant that these have been fertilized by two-way investments into China, and of course, Chinese investments into the region. And of course, China is now reaching out into Africa, into the Middle East, into Central Asia, into South Asia. And it is not only giving FDI and ODA, but a huge amount of lending is now going on through its commercial banks, which are then financing projects, investment projects, which are giving hard loans, which are giving commercial credits, and which are in fact going to be the main financing sources of the Chinese BRI program. In fact, some of the commercial banks which are really engaged in this process, such as, for example, the China Development Bank, is one of the largest banks of its kind in the world with an asset base of $350 billion. The Export-Import Bank is the third largest bank of its kind in the world. So these are huge resources which are centered around the surpluses that I have mentioned, which are available. Now, what is significant, and I will be rounding off my remarks over here, is that if you look at the nature of the relationship, the BRI, or Belt and Road Initiative, was seen by everyone as a purely infrastructure arrangement. I conceptualized this in a presentation I made, which I made in Beijing, that it was in a way a Chinese attempt at practicing Keynesian economics at the international level. It had a considerable amount of surplus capacity in its steel, engineering, and construction and sectors. And it found that it could, in fact, utilize this where the opportunity costs of the program would be considerably reduced. And it would, in fact, generate Keynesian effective demand for its capacities to, in fact, invest in infrastructure, not just in Asia, but then beyond into Central Asia and into Europe even. After all, China is now a major player in places like Greece, where they have, in fact, taken over the modernization and investment of the principal port in Greece. And I think they are now coming to similar arrangements in Portugal. Now, here, again, what has really happened is that when I listened to the speech of President Xi at the summit meeting, and then I read, he's very prolific in his writings, what I found was that he was not interested in infrastructure or trade. He was interested in conceiving the BRI as a comprehensive economic partnership arrangement in which there was to be a whole dense nature of relationships, which we all aspire to build, whether we are planning to do it at the bilateral level or whether we are planning to do it at the sub-regional level. They were planning to do it at the global level. But as far as China was concerned, this was not just a sort of hypothetical pie in the sky exercise. Every country with whom they were building up a relationship through the BRI had already moved into a process of dense economic relationships, mostly through trade, where China was certainly the principal source of exports, but for many of these countries in Central Asia, now in Africa, even in Latin America, it had emerged as one of the principal sources of import. In fact, you will be interested to know there are a whole range of countries in Latin America whose principal export market for their rich natural resources has now become China, as also in the case of sub-Saharan Africa. And that these commercial banks, which I have mentioned to you, have been investing massively in these particular countries in order to then access these resources. So therefore, in every country with which they are now seeking to use the BBI as an infrastructure network, or rather the BRI as an infrastructure network, they are building upon existing relationships which are already on the ground. Now, why I bring all this to your attention is that if you want to make a realistic assessment of the prospects of BBI itself, then you have to look around you and you have to see who is trading with you, where are you accessing your principal sources of capital now and expect to access it in the future, and to then construct any sub-regional arrangements that you have by, in fact, building upon the objective economic reality within which you are actually operating. Now, in all our cases, even in India, because after all, India's biggest source of import happens to be China, and it is also now emerging as an important investment source. You are facing a situation in which the resources, the capability for utilizing these resources, because it isn't that just China is now just providing the capital, it is also sending in its construction teams, its project development teams, and then sending in its resources in the way of steel and engineering and capital goods projects to, in fact, implement these. In Bangladesh now, most of the major investment projects, development projects which are going on, including the massive Podda Bridge, which has been largely financed from domestic resources, is actually being constructed by Chinese companies, who of course have then used this opportunity to advance loans to, in fact, augment the project by building in a railway network into the bridge, which in fact involves close to about another, about $4 or $5 billion in addition to that. So these are the new realities. If you are looking at our power plants, if you are looking at our big road networks, if you are looking at some of our, again, major capital intensive projects, fertilizer plant going up in northeast Bangladesh, all these are in fact being underwritten by Chinese loans. Now, no, unfortunately, in the literature, the computation of these cocktail of capital flows into these regions has not been satisfactorily compiled. So therefore, one of the challenges I give to the researchers from the BBI, for the BBI group, is to actually look at the more complex nature of the capital flows coming into the region in relation to sources, not just the more conventional FDI numbers, but the other loans. Secondly, to look at the nature of the chains which are being built. Now, one of the researchers, I think from SCAP, what's the name, Mitik, has done a very interesting attempt to compute value chains. Now, what I could not find, I think it may have been concealed in the graphs, is that she computed value chains for individual countries, both in terms of simple and complex value chains. Now, what would have been much more interesting is to see the cross-border value chains of each of the countries there, that who are these value chains connected with? And my hunch would be that certainly in the ASEAN region and in the East Asian region, virtually all these value chains which have been constructed would all be densely interrelated within the region of ASEAN and now within the region of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership countries. And if you look at the South Asian value chains, then the import value chains, which are very central then to our export capabilities outside the region, would also in fact have important linkages into the Asian region, because in all the countries, if China, apart from China, we have got chain networks or trading import networks with at least other countries. So in fact, my estimate in looking at all the South Asian countries was that with the exception of the US and the EU, the principal trading partners in the top 5, 4 of them will be from Asian countries, which means Asia, which means China, Japan, and Southeast Asian countries, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam. So this is the circumstances in which we operate. So now when we look at BBI, when I in fact did my study on the Southern Silk Route, when I in fact entered into discussions on BBI, and when I earlier on looked at BIMSTEC, my suggestion, in fact, I may even have made it in my first presentation before the ambassador when he was the Director General. My suggestion was that if you want BIMSTEC to work, you should bring in as a partner institution China, because that is the main player in the game. After all, he only has to look at his own country to, in fact, validate the propositions that I'm making to him, making before this meeting. And it is only then that BIMSTEC could, in fact, emerge as a growing concern. I mean, I see that Thailand has been very interested in promoting BIMSTEC, but in all the years that it has taken this initiative, it is no South Asian country, including India, figures in the top 5 list of its trading partners, whether it's imports or exports. And in fact, even their main infrastructure initiative of the road network connecting Thailand, Myanmar, and India has really remained in the realm of dreams, where nothing very substantive has actually emerged. Now, had they, in fact, plugged into the BCIM, Chinese funding would, in fact, have constructed this network from Kunming all the way to Kolkata, probably 5 years ago, if, in fact, we were willing to draw on these resources. But here we have a problem with Indo-Chinese relations. So let me conclude my presentation to you with this proposition, that at the end of the day, we may go and build around conference tables as many sub-regional or bilateral networks as we want. But at the end of the day, all these have to be related to the objective conditions which in fact govern economic relations, which are built around the existing pattern of trade flows, the existing volume of trade flows, the existing sources of capital inflows, and the nature and density of the value chains which in fact are operating in those regions to establish your connectivity. Looking at it objectively, the European-US relationship is really yesterday's relationship of the 20th century. In the 21st century, the import links and the capital flow links have already established themselves. The export linkages, my suspicion is, will emerge later on in the 20th century, because the world's biggest markets are now going to be in Asia. And in fact, the capital flows, if properly structured, and the economic relationships built around a comprehensive economic partnership will in fact be designed to have economic spaces created in China and in imported countries for a more diversified export pattern in the South Asian countries in particular to access these markets. Now, these are not going to come about simply by seeing the interplay of market forces, because market forces are historically very unfriendly forces, and they in fact work very overwhelmingly in favor of the dominant economic partner. The whole purpose of having partnership relationships is that you can then structure a more balanced pattern of relationships into the economic relationships of these countries, where you meet, you discuss, you look at the long-term possibilities, and you then structure both capital flows to identify the longer-term dynamic trading possibilities, which will never be covered in any gravity flow models. So these are the tasks. Now, my vision of the 21st century would be really a new world, economic world order centered around Asia, and an Asia which extends from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. Because if you now look at both Central Asia and you now look at both West Asia, whose historic markets lay in Europe and the United States, now all their principal markets for energy flows are in Asia, particularly to India, to China, to Korea, to Japan. And of course, now most of their trading flows are also originating in these regions because these are the most competitive sources of supply. And of course, South Asia itself has become a major trading partner, not just because of our energy dependency, but also because of our export of services in the way of migrant labor. So these are the new dense relationships of the 21st century, which need to be built upon. Now, I would conclude by saying that obviously one should not be so naive as to be innocent of the political and strategic dimensions of this relationship. And obviously, this element really depends on three crucial relationships and how they evolve. The relationships involving Japan, China, and India. Now, were these three nations to get together and realize the dreams of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, which he made in 1946, when he addressed the first Asian Unity Conference on the eve of the independence of India, where he visualized a wider Asian community, then we can really visualize a world order in which it will be once again a fully bipolar world, in which Asia would be one of the major and perhaps even the principal partner in that relationship. This means that one would look, at least in the political and strategic level, for a sense of vision and statesmanship, at least in these three partner countries. Because everyone else, I should keep in mind, and this should be the objective reality even governing thinkings in India and in Japan, already are very clear in their mind that they want to be members of this new Asian comprehensive economic partnership because it is manifestly in their interest to be connected to this. We in South Asia would have preferred to have entered into this partnership as a collective entity under the leadership of India, where they would have built their own sub-networks and density of relationship, which sadly have not emerged in spite of the last 40 years of initiatives under SAARC. And these would have been much better terms in which to, in fact, negotiate our partnership. Now, unfortunately, each of us will have to be making our own relationships and the way in which we enter into this process. India, again, will be as an advantage being the biggest partner. But this is the way it will flow. Now, periodically in India, I find there is a great talk of look east. I think it began possibly in the time of Vajpayee. And I think at that time, one of your foreign secretaries, Rajiv Sikri, even wrote a book, Look East. But the Indian version of Look East was always a one-eyed version. It was looking east into Southeast Asia, it was looking east into East Asia, and it covered the left eye, which needed to also look at China. And it was wishing to enter into partnerships with all these regions without appreciating that their principal trading partner at that time happened to be China. And there would be no look-east relationship without taking that reality into mind. So this is the perspective, I think, that India would keep in mind. How they will address their strategic and political problems is, of course, the challenge we all face. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope I've given you something to think about and also some issues which you may find worth researching and providing me with more substantive inputs the next time I apply my mind to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Subhan, for that excellent presentation. I'm very happy that you also provocated my nostalgic feelings and referring especially to 1947 Asian Relations Conference, where Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru started talking about larger Asian solidarity. In fact, unfortunately, I found very recently the memo, copy of the memo written by late Prime Minister SWR Bandaranaike, talking about Asian solidarity and Asian kind of Asian banks and then Asian atomic agencies. So we have missed that opportunity. And I will not take time because we have three discussions to make remarks on the excellent presentation that you have made, but I just make a couple of remarks and then we'll proceed. I think the word that we need to use, Professor Subhan, is the Orient. It is not just the Asia. I'm simply borrowing the two words, the word Orient from Ande Gunda Frank and then Edward Said. The Orient will be the center of growth. That's number one. It's quite interesting to see that that we need to look into the dense economic relations if we need to succeed. That is basically based on the economic integration, because if you don't have dense economic relationship, the economic integration is useless. And also, you made a very pertinent point, which I think many of us share, but then we have different and difficult political equations. The role of China in the useful economic integration. That is something that we need to keep in mind. Dr. Salim will agree that we would need additional time. I'm looking at what is the time in Dhaka. We are finish this by 12:15, but I think we would need
Ambassador Nakandala, we can actually have more time, so no worries about it. We can extend it for another 40 minutes or 45 minutes if needed. So please go ahead. Yes, Ambassador Nakandala, you were there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Probably we lost you for a few seconds, but can you hear us? Yes, I think some network problem from your side, but are you okay now? I think we are experiencing some network problem from Ambassador Nakandala's side, but we are
move on and
yes,
so he will be making the conclusion.
Exactly. Thank you, sir. So may I then invite Dr. Sutipant Chirativat, Professor Emeritus, Chulalongkorn University, Thailand, to make a brief comment. Professor Chirativat, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Salim, and also many thanks for the kind invitation so I could join this very important dialogue, Bay of Bengal initiative And of course, Professor Raymond Soban, with whom I have a great respect, and we haven't met for years, if you remember. Well, in the 90s, that we have quite a few sessions we had together. So very pleased again to see you.
You again.
And very sorry, I just came in the last 10 minutes to listen to your voice and your strong voice. And I think and also at this point in time, I think there will be more other intervenants and other what you call remarks. I try to make a short remarks. Of course, against this background of dialogue, I think we need to support all of us, our Bay of Bengal initiative and the people we're talking about the community. And also we know about the Myanmar group change the past week. And so we hope very much for the peaceful transition, and we need to support their people. And also, as we know, the world over, as a background, we're talking today about the pandemic. And before that, you know, there's about the technological transformation and many others, you know, trade tensions, the erosion of multilateralism, about Asia and all that, you know. So I think it's about all these things, again, this background, I think we have to keep in mind in this post pandemic, what to do. I mean, and in particular, our framework about Bay of Bengal initiative is had to take place, and what kind of thing we're looking for, what we think about our people, and now, of course, we look into the future. So we have quite already a year of pandemic and more years to follow. Some said a few years, some said could be more. In addition to all the issues that we face, and I heard from the last part of Professor Soban about if we go back to Asia, I agree, we need the so-called like, you know, the French historian famously said about la longue durée. So I am sure that Professor Soban also look at longue durée if we would like to think about what we like to do in the future. This is a subject I think very much we have in mind about the Bay of Bengal initiative. So let me address very shortly into 4 points I have to make here. The first one I think is, of course, to move the Bay of Bengal ahead. I think very much we have to look into the process in which it had to match the global and regional changing trend. And very much, you know, we can talk about narratives of multilateralism, regionalism, the kind of cooperation. We must also be encompassing economic here. We're talking a lot, but Professor Raymond mentioned the last part about the strategic and political and social. That includes all these, the new dynamics that also have to meet the expectation of our people. I would say quite concrete proposal and looking at what we had done in the past and making move into the future. Of course, a health issue is an immediate concern. Economic cooperation, FTA and all that, value chain, you know, how to, you know, that the capabilities of our, how to strengthen our people and job, you know, because now they talking very much about value chain. Another thing, people looking a lot about the, you know, that's how to fit in that kind of new value chain and all that, you know. So very much focus all along about this new process, a frank dialogue of all sides of multi-stakeholders while we move into the future. This will be my first point. Second point, I think very much, as we already said, looking in the case of the 20s, Professor Raymond Wright is to say again that in the big picture, Asian economy will become larger than the West developed countries combined in this decade. We already said, well, China tried to perhaps, that's we're talking about a kind of rivalries with the US, could become less than 10 years, the number one economy of the world. And but at the same time, we also to look at the kind of rivalries and conflict that had happened. Of course, with your superpower, US, China is one, and also the way you said the big countries. The Share Smith tried to say about look at the reorient. That's how the all alliance of from Northeast Asia, ASEAN down to South Asia, perhaps, to working more and look at the impact of kind of our cooperation. All the kind of exercise about the models, about the projection is still important, of course. And so we need to look very carefully about this two sides, how to best cooperation without going much into the conflict and rivalries, which is inevitable, but we need to make sure about this because if Bay of Bengal initiative have to fit in that kind of framework, in that kind of landscape that is moving fast. So we make sure that at this crossroad, we have to address this particular issue among ourselves. And that's why I think the purpose and belief in the kind of initiative framework that we would like to look at to reach multi-stakeholder to have very important, all these elements. Next, I think is also a kind of agile, flexible, and open network and connectivity should be encouraged as much as possible to make Bay of Bengal initiative, that's workable and to be also perhaps the central basis of societal communications. Have in mind, that's of course about kind of connectivity in all dimensions, physical, institutional, digital, business, people to people should be encouraged as much as possible. Looking at some might not work. You mentioned about the trilateral highways did not yet, from India to Myanmar now in trouble and to Thailand, but we still, I think it's, I'm quite optimistic and I see more upcoming side about such cooperation. And we're looking also, of course, in the Bay of Bengal, that would be maritime initiative and Thailand, Myanmar connection on the so-called like southern western connectivity for Thailand. There are several spots that we working from our West policy, the look West policy. You're talking about the look East to act East policy. We also have a kind of act West policy. So that could be encouraged as much as possible, extending to many parts of ASEAN, because ASEAN has become a strong connection in terms of a global value chain that we're talking about. And another point I think is very much at the core is a people-centric process, as involvement within the Bay of Bengal has to be the way for the future to deepening bond to the region and institution. I think that we have quite a number of lists, and I will not go into detail, but it's again mindful that action on the ground are important to let people perceived and felt about greater impact of Bay Bengal initiative and also that visibility, I mean. Last and not least, I think about building the capabilities of the Bay Bengal initiative to handle future challenges of the region, not only pandemic, but many more challenges. We'll be talking about the how that you should fit the people aspiration in many parts and region of the world and also in our region, whether it's a well-being of our people, the environment, the sustainability question, about changing lifestyle, about the technological change and all that. So Bay Bengal initiative should be able in part to address all the core demands and highlight the constructive approach to address these pressing and also inspirational issues with capability building network and also management and also the institution of the Bay Bengal initiative. It remains to be working out as solid ground to moving the region forward. Thank you for your attention. And again, Professor Raymond, hello to you. Thank you. And also hello to everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Stepan, for your comments. Now, it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Poshraj Pandey. And we would be very grateful if you can do this within 5 minutes. Of course, very difficult, because our idea is that whether we will have time for a couple of Q&As after the two remarks. Dr. Poshraj Pandey.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, all colleagues. Well, it's a great pleasure and privilege to be in a panel together with Professor Raymond Sobhan.
Professor.
I thank Sanem and Professor Shalim for providing me this opportunity. And I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Raymond Sobhan for illuminating keynote address, particularly geopolitical, diplomatic, and economic rationale for regional cooperations and for illuminating on those areas. Conceptually, a country participates in the regional cooperation forum if the utility of cooperation, which is the function of positive or negative externalities from cooperation or from spillover effect, and the cost from adopting the regional policy cooperation is higher than the utility without cooperation. I mean, from this perspective, I fully agree with Professor Raymond Sobhan that structure and density of economic linkages determine the success of any regional economic cooperation. With dense economic linkages, utility of cooperation is higher than the cost of non-cooperation. Or to put it differently, there will be and such economic linkages, that higher density, it creates higher complementarity among the economies. So that would be beneficial for regional cooperation. Well, I mean, for me, is regional cooperation would be a complementary policy instrument to the national policy. I mean, for the most important thing, and that is the crucial aspect, is the adoption of coherent national strategy to address structural flaws of the economy, national economy, particularly poverty and multiple and intersecting inequalities, and the regional cooperation that would supplement and complement our national policy and national strategy. I mean, for a BIMSTEC country, what I think is, what I feel, it should be guided, I mean, cooperation should be guided by three principles. First, scaling up resources. Second, enhancing policy space among the member countries, BIMSTEC countries. And third would be building resilience of member countries. I mean, here the first principle, which is related to scaling up resources, that is related to financial cooperation, covering mechanism for short-term and long-term finance. The second, principle, particularly regarding policy space, that is related to the joint regional action for trade, investment, technology, connectivity, and access to diversified market. I mean, we need policy space for that. And the third one related to building resilience. It should strengthen cooperation for mitigating, say, food issues of food crisis, issues of health crisis, and also issues of this climate changes. So these our regional cooperation, particularly in BIMSTEC, should be guided by this principle. And I was just looking at the agenda of this economic Bay of Bengal economic dialogue. I found, and most of the component of the principle I highlighted, three principles are covered in the deliberations. For example, health, education, employment, food security, trade, investment, connectivity, regional value chains. Among others, these are the issues we identified for our dialogue, and I think these are the components of the principles, three principles I just highlighted. And on all these session, I wish for all this session, I wish for a very engaging and fruitful dialogue in each of the session. And finally, I wish every success of this economic dialogue. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Posh, for strictly adhering to the time frame. We would like to hear from you more, but then we have time constraint. Dr. Nityananda, are you there? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. It's still morning in India.
Yes.
It has been always a great pleasure listening to Professor Shobhan. He is one of the rare human repositories of regional knowledge in this region we have. I also I feel some affiliation to him because both of us come from the same place, Murshidabad in West Bengal. So maybe we share some genes also. And he is, of course, a global public intellectual. But sir, the problem is that our politicians cannot be global public intellectual. They have to win elections. They have to show results, whatever in 5 years. They cannot say that 15 years down the line, we will achieve this. No, they cannot. You rightly talked about BCIM corridors, which would have been made 5 years back. In fact, China also proposed that they will make a bullet train from Calcutta connecting Dhaka, Chittagong, and Mandalay to Kunming, 1,600 kilometers. And I guess if India agreed, we would have seen that by now. And India is still struggling to have its own bullet train from Ahmedabad to Mumbai, which is just 500 kilometers. Now, that's the reality. Just few months back, India walked out of RCEP negotiations only because of the reason that it felt that competing with China is not going to be easy. And right or wrong, there is a perception that China is heavily subsidizing its industry, and because of that, India is not able to compete. Whatever be the facts and situation, the reality is that India has suffered substantial premature deindustrialization over the last 1 decade. Professor Selim Raihan has shown in his own study that Bangladesh is fortunate, did not suffer premature deindustrialization, but India suffered. Now, because of that, there is a feeling in Indian policymakers that somehow there has to be some restriction on Chinese imports. Now, two perspectives from which you can look at it. Now, this can actually be an opportunity for other countries in the region, because if there is some restriction on China, some amount of trade diversion is going to happen. Now, who is going to benefit from that trade diversion? Now, will countries like Bangladesh, Thailand, maybe Vietnam, Malaysia, they will take advantage. Not West can take advantage, because if India has to erect trade barriers against China, it has to be on MFN basis. So that means those who have some sort of regional arrangement with India will benefit. Bangladesh will benefit because of India's duty-free access. Nepal, and Professor Rahman also said, with Nepal, with Bhutan, with Sri Lanka, and of course with Myanmar, Thailand, we have FTA in the form of India as an FTA. So these are the countries who might benefit. So this is something that we can work towards. Second thing that I would bring to attention is that I do not fully agree with the perspective that was giving, that it's only because of state subsidy that China is competitive. It's also because India refused to move away from freedmen to Keynesianism, which means India did not take care of health, education. India did not invest enough in infrastructure. Now, COVID has possibly brought some opportunity in this regard, because now everybody agrees that Keynesianism is the way out. So India is now coming out for fiscal conservatism. Now, if that means that India is more willing to build infrastructure, then that can come at the advantage. So we have seen that Bangladesh and Myanmar and Thailand is not taking advantage of this situation, even Nepal, Bhutan, because eastern part of India is very poor in infrastructure. So Bangladesh is not connected well with India. And so if that doesn't happen, automatically Nepal, Bhutan is not connected with Bangladesh. And this has a history behind it. Calcutta was the city of India, before, independence. It was well connected. It has a huge hinterland. It was also economic capital, because of we were in Iron Age. Now, for whatever reason, we have moved into plastic age. Now, when India moved from Iron Age to plastic age, Mumbai became more important than Calcutta. So because of that, now Western India is much more developed compared to Eastern India. Now, when Eastern India is not developed, all countries suffer. Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, which also loses linkage with India because Bangladesh comes in between. So if we can link all these countries together, especially the eastern part of South Asia, if we make BBIN more effective with huge infrastructural push, then what we have seen over the last couple of decades, that Bangladesh has moved ahead compared to other states within India in the eastern part. So probably Bangladesh will work as steam engine for the rest of India, in the southern Asia. And there, if you cannot bring China directly, because I would be afraid if China comes in BBIN or BCIM or even BIMSTEC, we will have the same fate of SAARC, sir. We know that SAARC, with all its potentials, could not move only because of India-China problem. So if we bring China into any other, formation, you will have the same fate, that nothing will move. So if China has to be brought, China can be brought indirectly. So if BCIM could not, become reality, or if Calcutta Kunming could not, bullet train could not become reality, possibly we can think of Dhaka Kunming, linkage with both train and roadways, and then we can think of Calcutta Dhaka, another linkage. So indirectly we can achieve the same objective. I think with that, what Professor Sobhan is saying can be achieved, but not so directly and indirectly. We have also seen that China has become largest trading partner. So no matter what India does in terms of trade restriction, China will remain largest trading partner for India in the foreseeable future. That is going to be there. But with linkage with Chinese, if other countries become more competitive, that is even better. So that will help, for example, Bangladesh to get greater market access to India, and within this region, we can have more integration. Now, what is more important in my view is that maybe we can have BIMSTEC FTA and probably deeper FTA. What we have not seen is that despite some improvement in trade linkages between these countries, investment linkages have not been happening. China was investing, but now India has put some restriction on Chinese investment. So you see some dampening there. Now, look east can have different meanings. Your Professor Sobhan is right that when we say look east, we keep our left eyes closed. So, Thailand, India, despite our ASEAN-India FTA, we did not see much of deeper trade linkages. Trade between India and Thailand did not improve much, whereas Vietnam has improved. Bangladesh has also improved, despite the fact that Bangladesh used to be largest import source. Now China is the largest import source for Bangladesh, but India is still important. Now, in that scenario, Thailand happens to be the largest foreign tourist destination for India, followed by Singapore, which is the second largest destination. Thailand received 2 million Indians tourists every year, and Singapore 1 million. So of course, for ordinary Indians, look east and with right eye open really happens pretty well. Now, left eye opening is difficult because politically, in the current context, the Ladakh tension and some Arunachal, issues is going to be difficult. But we should not, make second base the enemy of the first base. So if the first base doesn't happen, let's move ahead with the second base and improve connectivity here. I think this region is having good potential, and me also personally being from Eastern India, I have a great personal, psychological interest of, the whole region improving further and possibly being more prosperous than the western part of India. And I think Bangladesh can be the engine of growth in that part of India. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nitya. Thank you very much for all the three commentators. Basically, we have 30 minutes or so. Now, before I open the discussion for the forum, I would like if Professor Mustafizur Rahman is online, whether he would like to say a few words. Professor Mustafizur, are you? Hello, is he online? I can't see if he's.
I think he is online, but somehow he's not able to comment. Maybe he can come later.
Yeah.
So we can go ahead with the open discussion session
Yeah.
then.
Then please identify your name and affiliation, and then you can pose your question. These are questions only, no remarks, because we have concluded all the remarks by three eminent people. You can certainly ask the question, very short questions to provide the wider opportunities for everybody. Thank you. What is the mechanism?
Can I initiate a question you allow, Honorable Chair? I have a question for Professor Hemant Sohan. The question is as follows. In the Southeast Asian region, what we have seen that, as you rightly pointed out, the kind of integration actually was driven very much by the dense trade amongst themselves. It's not only the trade in final goods, but trade in intermediate goods. But at the same time, what really was important that the kind of convergence among these countries in terms of domestic trade and investment policies. Like those countries were actually following similar kind of open trade policies or investment policies, which actually helped those countries to integrate. But in South Asia, we don't see that kind of convergence. So when you talk about integration, we see that all these countries, they are moving into different direction when it comes to having their own trade and investment policy. We are seeing that some of the countries actually moving backward, like getting into more protectionist regime. So do you think that this kind of scenario would actually, when the future you were talking about, would really help getting into that bigger, larger integration, what you were envisaging?
Okay, you want me to reply right away? I can do that, sure. No, my view is that we are familiar with this problem of greater harmony in the ASEAN region. But again, the relevant point which I had made for the ASEAN region is that their principal trading arrangements are not just between themselves, but actually with China. In fact, I was seeing a recent announcement that in the year 2020, China's trade with ASEAN came to over $450 billion. And it was a two-way trade, not a one-way trade. And it made ASEAN into China's largest trading partner. This means they were both exporting to China and importing from China. Now, whilst there may be more harmonization within ASEAN countries, I don't think that anyone has been sitting down with China and seeking to harmonize their trading relationship with China. China is a law unto himself as to the particular arrangements they make. I mean, whether they are subsidizing or whether they are giving and how they are doing it, all these remain kind of opaque. But the fact of the matter is that it enables them to supply goods and services competitively, and it's a model which should be emulated rather than contested. But the relevant issue is that whatever happened didn't come because I think anyone was setting out to harmonize. In fact, the only harmonizing element in that region probably came from multinational companies, which were in fact building assembly chains, where at one point China was serving as the end product for assembling intermediate inputs which were coming from suppliers across the Southeast Asian region. and that this process may now be progressively reversing itself. So in those circumstances, the issue of harmonization is important, but I don't think it is central to my argument at all, because central to my argument is how the mutuality of the relationship develops and how the trade networks are actually constructed. And my key element in this argument is that you want to construct value chains and networks. It isn't enough for you to depend exclusively on market forces. There has to be a constructive engagement within the framework of a trading relationship, whether bilateral or whether multilateral, in which you explore possibilities of a more dynamic perspective on how, in fact, your trade structures will evolve. So the central dialogue I think we all need to have with China is how do we actually access the Chinese market in South Asia in the same way that it was possible for the Southeast Asian countries to do so. And this is the major issue, that how did China emerge as the major export market for virtually every Southeast Asian and East Asian country? And if we can get a satisfactory understanding of this and to see what were the elements which brought this about, this would give us some idea of how this would work. I mean, we keep asking ourselves this problem vis-a-vis India. And of course, we keep looking more at the architecture of the trade rather than the structure of the economies, and why we could not make the structural adjustments within the production basis of these economies to make India more receptive. So this would be, I think, my response to you.
Thank you, Professor Subhan.
Ambassador Nakanda, Dr. Probir, he wanted to ask a question.
Where is Probir?
Yeah. Yes, Pravir.
Yeah, sir.
Go ahead, Pravir.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for giving me the floor, and listening to Professor Rehman Sobhan means that you unlearn many things, and then you learn many new dimensions, many new narratives, which are very, very important for us. So I have just questions to Professor Sobhan, and following what Dr. Raihan said and other colleagues. I mean, if I may ask a very simple questions, that in the Bay of Bengal countries, presently the regional trade is not picking up, and we know it very well, why it doesn't exceed more than 7%. And the trade volume is also don't go, more than 50 billion US dollar in either way, export or import. So may I ask to Professor Sobhan that how do we strengthen in his own knowledge and in his own guidance, if he can tell us what 7 Bay of Bengal countries should do, in terms of it's promoting regional trade. This is Bay of Bengal is also, water is also shared by some of the neighboring countries like Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia. So is it a time to open a dialogue, just like ASEAN has been doing with their dialogue partners, who are not FTA partners, but they bring the dialogue partners, make them involved, engaged with the region. So is it a time that we may look at Bay of Bengal dialogue partners who are sharing the water of the Bay of Bengal to open some discussion, bring them in the region for investment, trade, and many more? Thank you.
Thank you, Probir. You are a person who has been involved in a variety of our regional discussions, both at the BCIM level and also in the South Asian level. So I don't have to tell you too many things. Now, I think the answers are reasonably straightforward. I think if you look at the relationships within the BCIM region, particularly the South Asia component, whatever numbers you have in aggregate, are really largely determined by countries' bilateral trade with India. I mean, if you look at the production structures of the smaller countries, they are hardly at the moment adjusted to bring about significant trade. I think Bangladesh would presumably be able to export some garments to Nepal, but it is competing with both India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka in the production and export of garments. So obviously, until we go for greater diversification, that is not going to happen. Now, the big problem I have always found in elevating the volume of trade in the South Asian region was the failure to, in fact, access the Indian market. Now, we put a lot of blame initially on the whole protectionist structure of the Indian market and the NTBs as well. But the more substantive problem always was that we had structural asymmetries for purposes of accessing that market. And even when Bangladesh has actually been given duty-free access, as has Nepal, we have not really been able to create the levels of investment diversification to, in fact, substantially benefit from this. And this would only come about, we always believe, through significant inflows of Indian capital coming in with the objective of retargeting the Indian market. This has been a game which I've been engaged in for 40 years. And any of these solutions that we are talking about in 2021, we have been talking about in 1981 as well, in case anyone has any notion that they are bringing anything new into the table is value added to the discussion. So this means a much more purposeful engagement in terms of how you really bring this about. We have made many attempts to try to get India to recognize their shared role in bringing about a level of reciprocity in trade. Now, China has managed to do it with its ASEAN partners. India has not managed to do it with its South Asian partners. I think the new elements in BBI, which come from Myanmar and Thailand, really you may have as many talks as you want with them, but both Myanmar and Thailand are already plugged into their trading networks. I mean, if you look at China's density of economic relations with China, it is, or virtually you may say, integrated into the Chinese market. And also, in fact, deeply, I'm sorry, we are having some disturb, deeply integrated into the Thai market, where Thailand's, Bangkok's entire energy needs are being met by energy supplies from the Bay of Bengal in Myanmar, outside that, and delivering energy to Bangkok to produce 40 megawatts of energy. So these are the relationships, and unofficially, of course, much of Myanmar's natural resources have been flowing both to China and to Thailand. Now, these are relationships which you may talk about it, but these relationships are not going to be undone. And now that Myanmar is an integrated partner with the ASEAN countries, and it has its own links with China, I'm not sure that BBIN is going to make any significant difference in improving our relationships. Therefore, we need, again, as I said, to operate within a wider economic framework within which these relationships can then be brought about. I mean, if in Bangladesh and India had been more sensible in our dealings with Myanmar, then the energy supplies which are now being sent to Kunming from the northern bay areas of Myanmar would have been going through Bangladesh and supplying energy needs in Bangladesh and then meeting the needs of Eastern India. But that also did not come about. So these are practical problems, I think, that we have to face, Praveen. How we will connect it, I'm not sure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Suri, yes, please
Yes.
come in.
Thank you, Sumit. Sir, thank you. As Prabir said, always learning when you speak. And so I had a question with regard to one of the comments that you have made, and I fully agree that we will have to build on the existing networks. And you have mentioned the BBIN, Motor Vehicle Agreement, BRI, then the trilateral. Now we see that within the regional groupings, they are trying to have some standardization. But across the regions, if we want to really build on the existing networks, you need to harmonize, standardize. You will have to have common customs clearance mechanisms, data exchange. So at what level that coordination will take place? That is a major issue as we see. For example, now we are trying to connect with the trilateral, but we don't have a mechanism so that cross-border connectivity is seamless. So coordination, I think, sir, is becoming a major issue, and will become a major issue because we don't have a platform where this cross-regional standardization and harmonization can take place.
You see, Mustafiz, that is precisely why you actually cannot exclusively depend on market forces to bring about integration. And that is why you need regional arrangement to deal with precisely those problems. Now, had BCIM, for example, become a working regional arrangement rather than it operates at one level as a talk shop, and at the business level, it operates exclusively in the marketplace. But had this become a functioning entity, as I suppose the Chinese wanted virtually from day one, then we would have been addressing all these arrangements. Now, in the network which was actually constructed by ADB, connecting Yunnan province with ASEAN countries, they, of course, constructed the infrastructure links from Yunnan through Laos and Thailand. And the idea was that you are going to have a railway connection and traffic flows all the way into Singapore. Now, obviously, if you are having the infrastructure, you will have to create the software to, in fact, make this connection seamless. And that was basically the objective. I mean, the Chinese have managed to create a level of seamless connectivity now between you may say Beijing and
Central Asia.
Not just Central Asia, with in fact Europe. And in fact, container trains are moving all the way across to the English Channel. So if that can be achieved, and you are making this progressively more seamless, you are in a position to do it over here too. So we will never build that unless you have a facilitating process. And of course, we cannot build that seamless connectivity with China unless we have got cooperation with India, because the geographical reality is that Northeast India comes in between. And Nepal may in fact actually manage to do that. But China has already started building its road, or is it rail network from Lhasa to Kathmandu. I'm sure they will be interested to extending that all the way to Delhi into Bombay, into Mumbai, as they have actually done from China to Gwadar in Pakistan. And you have then created the software for that. So that is, I think, the fact why you need regional network.
Yeah. Okay. I think.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions raised, and then I think we had a very, very important session today. It was, as many said, it was a learning experience to listen to Professor Rehman Subhan. As always, it's a personal pleasure to see him and listen to him. I think number of suggestions that he had made are very useful. In fact, Professor Mustafa's question about policy coordination. The policy coordination needs a structural mechanism. That is why we have the kind of regional organizations to do the policy coordination intergovernmentally. So that is very important. I just wanted to, before wrapping up, because we have another 5 minutes, before wrapping up, Professor Subhan mentioned about China. In fact, Chinese, the policies are very, very straightforward, because they said, I think in 2012, if I may remember, the government of China made a policy announcement to say Yunnan province is the China's gateway to South and Southeast Asia. So that's the policy decision. And then the rest is to the rest of the countries, because once China said that on policy, Yunnan province is the China's gateway to South and Southeast Asia, we have to utilize that opportunity. So whether we are doing that or not doing is the question. Still, I think that is what Professor Subhan today raised. Number of issues which are very important and pertinent. In fact, still we are struggling to conclude the BIMSTEC FTA. We are still struggling, and then Dr. Day raised the question about how do we increase the regional trade, because we all are trading with not within the region. We do it outside, and then we tried to analyze in 2015 with the preferential list given by 7 member states, and then we found, in fact, ESCAP helped us to do that. We found that the commitments are much lower than what they have committed in the SAFTA process, South Asian Free Trade Area. So these are difficulties. These are challenges. That is why we thought, what is possible then if the FTA is not possible? What is possible? Because we saw some of my friends, including Salim, Professor Mustafur again, and then Prabir, we all saw that RCEP is going to come. So what are we going to do? RCEP, can we do that RCEP plus or something like that? It was very difficult in a sense. But I wish to conclude this session with the permission of everybody. It was a personal pleasure to see all my friends, although we have not been able to meet personally for last 1 year, and I think it will take some more time. The COVID has brought the importance of and the relevance of a greater regional cooperation and integration. That's a lesson that we should learn. And with those remarks, I'll request Salim to conclude the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sumit Nakandara, for your chairmanship of this session. And I must thank Professor Rehman Subhan. It is always, exciting to listen to your deliberation, and we learn every time we learn new things. Thank you so much. And I must thank 3 other panelists who made comments, and also other participants, Dr. Probir and Professor Mustafizur Rahman, and all other participants. So I welcome you to the next session, which will start at 2:30 p.m. Bangladesh time on digital connectivity and e-commerce, and Dr. Poshraj Pandey will chair the session, and there will be eminent speakers from this region. With this, again, I thank you all and look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bhalo holo.
Yes,
thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sumit, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the